Everybody, it's Michael Shermer. Time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. As always, brought to you by, your favorite magazine, Skeptic magazine. There it is in print. I always bring this up because, there's a lot of online magazines now, which are all cool. I subscribe to a bunch of them myself, and we're online. You can go to skeptic.com/magazine and get your digital subscription. But wouldn't it be cool to actually hold a magazine in your hands? Old school. I still get physical newspapers. Oh my God, that's how crazy we are. And we keep them all in print, almost all of our back issues, going back to volume 1, number 1, with Isaac Asimov on the cover, 1992. Oh my God, we've been at this for a long time. Okay. So skeptic.com/magazine to check that out. And if you want to give us a little love, we are a 501c3 nonprofit science education research organization. Your donations are tax deductible. Skeptic.com/donate. Okay. That's it for our commercials. My guest today is Drew Ramsey, medical doctor. He's a board-certified psychiatrist, author, and leading voice in nutritional psychiatry. Oh my God, I never heard of that, but I like the sound of it. So we'll get into that in a minute. And integrative mental health. He's a fellow of the American Psychiatric Association and founder of the Brain Food Clinic and Spruce Mental Health. For 20 years, he served as an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, where he taught and supervised psychotherapy and nutritional psychiatry. Dr. Ramsey has authored 4 books, including the international bestseller, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. Oh, that's a timely one. Should bring that back. Well, there's some of that actually in this book, so we'll get to that. And 3 e-courses. He's a dynamic speaker, podcast host, and educator, has delivered 3 TEDx talks, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Today Show, NPR, and other notable outlets. He lives in Jackson, Wyoming. Oh my God, that's Cheney country, isn't it? We're not going to get into politics today. With his wife and family in Jackson, Wyoming. You can read more about his work at drewramseymd.com. There's no dots or anything like that in there. drewramseymd.com. Hey, Drew, nice to have you. Nice to see you. Oh, I forgot to give you a proper introduction of the book. Here it is, the new book. Sorry, I spaced out on that.
There we go.
Healing the Modern Brain. 9
I like what you said about
tenets
having
to build. Yeah, let me give you a proper introduction there. The book is Healing the Modern Brain: 9 Tenets to Build Mental Fitness and Revitalize Your Mind. I think this is something of a PSA for everybody. We all have brains. If you're listening to this, you have one, and you want to know how you can improve it. So here we are. All right. So let's start with just give us your story. What interested you way back whenever you decided you wanted to be a doc and then specialize in psychiatry?
Well, Michael, it's a treat to be with you, and hey, everybody listening. I'm an Indiana farm boy, so I grew up in really, really rural Indiana. I'm a product of the Indiana public education system, graduate of the Indiana Academy for Science, Mathematics, and Humanities at Ball State University, and then went to Indiana University, one of the greatest medical schools in our country, the largest medical school in our country, produced more doctors in the U.S. than any other
Really?
medical
I had no
school.
idea. Oh, wow.
Yeah, nobody does. IU is a great, great medical school. Amazing. And so when I was there, I just got really fascinated in listening to people, getting better at that. And I just got really interested in patients who are struggling with their mental health, depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, PTSD. We saw these illnesses even back then when I was in medical school. Believe it or not, I graduated in the year 2000. And so as things were starting to change, we're starting to think about mental health and psychiatry more. And then we were learning so much about the brain. Back then it was like, we knew a little bit about things like serotonin. We had some new medications, but things really have exploded over the last 2 decades in terms of what we know about the brain. So somehow I was lucky enough to kind of pick psychiatry. And I think part of it is I just cared about mental health. And then I just really love brain science and the idea that what we do in our everyday lives, how we live our lives, the choices we make, that affects our neurons, our brain cells. And if we make the right choices, we can live a life, take better care of our brains, and we feel that. So
Nice.
I think that's what
Psychiatry has come so far in the last quarter century. I went to Pepperdine University in Malibu, and I took a course in abnormal psychology. And so part of the project was we had to go up to Camarillo State Hospital, just up PCH, like 1 day a week to just volunteer. And it was like right out of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I thought, oh my God, I could just never do this. This is so depressing. And
well, yeah,
yeah, it's crazy.
a lot of people have not been in institutionalized settings or worked with people or seen people sometimes who have, either, severe mental illness or, in settings like that. So, where something with their psychology is, causing them to struggle, be incarcerated. So, yeah, not a lot of people have seen that, Michael.
Yeah, no, I know. That building now, by the way, the whole complex is now Cal State Channel Islands. It's a university. So that's kind of fun. I think they closed it after Reagan pulled a lot of the funding for mental health facilities, something like that, which probably a bad idea. I think a lot of those people ended up on the street, and it's part of the homelessness problem we're still dealing with. Could you give us kind of an overview of where psychiatry has come? Let's see, I don't know, since the bad old days of One Flew of the Cuckoos, if that was ever even accurate. How much progress have we made in medications for schizophrenia or severe depression or any of these disorders?
Well, we've made lots of progress in understanding the brain, what's going on with it. Healing the modern brain also focuses on a couple of new lenses, right? With this idea of a lot of people are thinking about psychiatry and about their mental health just in terms of like one neurotransmitter, like dopamine or serotonin, or just one medication. And our brains are quite dynamic. They use an incredible amount of energy. They're really some of our most fascinating cells in terms of how they work. And there's just a lot of new science and research. Your brain continues to grow and repair itself in adult life if you make the right choices. And we don't have total control over all of these processes. I see lots of patients here in my office who it blows my mind how good of care they're taking of themselves, and they're still struggling with some mental health symptoms. That happens. But I think we all know that we can do a better job taking care of our mental health, and that we don't really have much of a framework besides building it. One of the ways that psychiatry, I'm hoping, is going to continue to evolve is being in our lives not just as a sickness, that you only come and see a doctor like me when you have a mental health problem. I think no other field of medicine runs like this. Does it, Michael? I mean, all the other fields of medicine, like, they're on your shoulder. They've got some advice for you, right? The GI doc, the heart doc, and you don't wait until the last minute. Hopefully, there's
Hopefully.
like a prevention.
Right.
And we don't do that in mental health though, right? We say like, hey, like, other than like, I don't know, don't drink too much, don't do drugs. There's not a notion of how do you actually build your mental health? How do you build mental fitness? Like, what would you do? What would a week look like if you were like, oh, I'm really dedicated to making sure that I'm insulating, building, optimizing my mental health? And so I think where psychiatry has been going is one like revolution in the science, neuroplasticity. I talk a lot in the book about inflammation, things like the microbiome, all the organisms that live in your gut and how those affect things like your cognition and your mood. Um, uh, and then I think we have the reality of where psychiatry and where mental health is for most Americans, which is really somehow all this new science, all the meds we have, all the treatments we have that it really work quite well. Somehow that's not breaking through. We still have this epidemic that keeps growing. So I also think that psychiatry is in a spot probably of some humility.
Yeah, that's a
Uh,
great analogy because if you go to a cardiologist, they are going to outline and tell you exactly what you should be eating or not eating and exercising 5 days a week, 20 minutes to an hour a day, and so on, to prevent that you having to come back to him when it's too late or when you've had severe damage to your heart.
Yeah, that's the hope. And just like our hearts, our brains, our minds have a set of preventative strategies in the science and the research that I felt I just kept seeing over and over again on my couch. I'm really blessed as a psychiatrist. I've just had such wonderful experiences taking care of patients and their families over the years. And I've just seen a lot of people turn the corner in all kinds of interesting and surprising ways. And then over time, there's sort of themes that you see. When people form more connections, and maybe it sounds obvious to say, but when you form more connections, you have deeper friendships, you take care of that romantic partner. Uh, your life is more fulfilling in all kinds of ways. That really pays dividends almost always for people when times are tough. In
You
particular,
actually have a
find so much
couch?
solace. What's
You
that?
actually have a couch in your office?
Yeah,
You
that's my
do? Oh my
couch right
God,
here,
there it
Michael.
is.
Yeah, it's like a
That's great.
real, like, full this is the I gave a TEDx talk and I said, this is the Brain Scanner 3000. It's like the most complex and sophisticated piece of brain diagnostic and treatment equipment
It's
that we
really
have.
funny.
And I think it still works. I love my couch, it's a I've spent a fair amount of time as a psychiatrist on a couch myself, getting everything tuned up. But yeah, I still have a couch.
That's
Great,
great.
great, great
So
tool.
each of your chapters opens with a anecdote about one of your patients who remain anonymous, of course. Give us an idea of, like, I don't know, half a dozen of the different problems people come to you for.
Yeah, well, so people come and see me for problems with their mood and anxiety. I find a lot of times people find me in moments of transition in their lives when they're shifting geographically or changing jobs, or suddenly their marriage has ended, something like that. Oftentimes people will find me after trauma, and not so many, often maybe just acutely, but a lot of people are carrying things, and it's hard for them to find a place or a person to unburden those with. Um, Certainly those types of problems. Let's see, marriage problems, school problems, failure to launch problems, executive problems, and matriarch problems. Those are all of the
Matriarch problem. What
favorite
is that?
problems that
What's a
show
matriarch
up.
problem?
A matriarch problem. Oh, the matriarch. So the matriarchs are this really interesting kind of class right now, I would say, having a bit of a revolution of a lot more attention and I think acknowledgement of, I know, a lot of wisdom, a lot of sexiness, a lot of burden of service. So often women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are, both doing a lot of caregiving of their kids, but then also their parents. And so the matriarchs, they have a lot of balls in the air and they handle it in a way that's I just find quite inspiring. So
And is there still a big distinction in psychiatry and abnormal psychology between psychosis and neuroses? Like, a lot of things you're talking about, I think would be more neuroses, not schizophrenia where people are hallucinating and they don't even know where they are or whatever.
yep. So you're talking about in some ways the levels of mental health disorders and psychotic disorders, as you're noting. Involve some really severe symptoms, both those positive symptoms like you're talking about hallucinations and paranoia, but also the negative symptoms, the trouble engaging, the cognitive problems that comes with some of these conditions, and and then oftentimes we compare those like neurotic problems, more like depression and anxiety. I think as we get a longer road in terms of treating mental health disorders with more science. You see more overlap in the genetics, right? When you look at the genetics, things like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder have a lot more overlap. And boy, so does depression than we ever kind of considered. And then you often meet patients, and when you take a nuanced history without a lot of stigma, you see some people who have a little bit more what we would consider like psychotic symptoms, subtle paranoia, or over inclusive ideas. And so I probably divide that a little bit less. And
Hmm.
I think you're also speaking, though, to something, and I appreciate you bringing it up, which is population, 1% of our population in the United States has schizophrenia, has
1%,
severe
that's a
mental
lot
illness. Is 1%,
of
right?
340 million people. That's a lot.
It's a lot of people, and it's a lot of families. I always like to say these aren't individuals, right? These are people who are in families, and if everybody who's listening has a family member that has a psychotic disorder, it presents certain challenges. We know these individuals are going to die 10 to 15 years earlier than everyone else. And in some ways, I think it's always a test of a society of how we care for people with illnesses like schizophrenia, that we are understanding more than we ever have before and having some interesting and new and novel treatments coming out.
Yeah,
Um,
that's I just double checked my slow moving math brain. 3.4 million Americans, 340 million Americans. Okay, so that's 3.4 million Americans with schizophrenia, and then they're all part of a family, so you can double, triple, quadruple that number for the people affected. That's your point.
Yeah, and it's one of the points I make in the book, in is sort of talking about the modern mental health crisis, to try and put some of the numbers out there. We understand we're talking 58 to 61 million people in America just with depression and
Mm.
anxiety. There's a lot of kind of focus now on where that's coming from. And I think it's important it's a mix. There's a mix of increased awareness. There's a mix of some new things driving mental health disorders. We've never had to contend with social media before. Nobody's ever had a teaspoon of microplastics in their brain before, but now we all do. So, um, but yeah, it's really important for us all to be aware of how common mental health disorders. I think mostly for everybody listening for the kind of wake up call, which is I hope a little bit what this book does, which is a notion that's probably coming for you. And if you don't have tools on how to deal with your mental health and mental health concerns and symptoms, you're just not going to fare as well in this life. It's not a kind of question of who in that stat we always see, like, oh, about 20% of Americans struggle with mental health. Like, that's not actually true when you look at the life history of a
I
person.
mean, it's more,
So
it's
having
higher.
more of these tools.
Yeah. Well, I guess what was behind my question is this problem of diagnoses. Talk about the DSM. Maybe you could riff on that a little bit in this context. Like, how do you know someone is suffering from depression or anxiety? I mean, short of they say, I'm depressed or I'm anxious. But
That's a good
but
start. I like
you
that.
know
I like
you want
asking
more
them.
than
I
that.
like well, I as a clinician, I am always interested in hearing about people's symptoms and struggles, what they're suffering with. When people say, "What should I talk about with you?" and it's like, I hope you talk to me about the things you can't talk to anybody else about, and particularly things that are causing you pain. When I see dysfunction in someone's life, the DSM, as you mentioned, it's a research tool. It's a great diagnostic manual. If you're in my world, it is so. People criticize it all the time, and I trained at Columbia where the DSM came from, and Bob Spitzer, who is the architect of the modern DSM. Actually, he taught me how to do the mental status exam. He taught our mental status exam class at Columbia, which is like the essence of how you practice. And
Can
so
you just give what is that?
I'm biased.
Can you just give it?
What's
Just give us a 1 minute.
mental
Yeah.
status exam is as you sit with the patient, there's a set of kind of parameters, criteria, sort of signs and symptoms that you're thinking about. You're thinking about someone's orientation and alertness, their dress, what they're wearing. You're seeing whether their fingernails are clipped or not, or whether a little disheveled. You're paying attention to someone's speech, whether it's got a normal rate, rhythm, prosody, volume. You're thinking about someone's thought process and content, and both of those things a little separately. Somebody who's linear or goal directed, as we say, versus someone who's very inclusive or tangential, or someone whose thought process is disrupted, as the illnesses we're talking about, some of the major psychotic illnesses. That's really where you sort of notice it in someone where their thought processes and cognition get so interrupted. We're thinking about screening for any active symptoms of any hallucinations, any severe depressive symptoms, any suicidal thoughts. So that sort of thought content. And then you're always thinking about someone's insight. The first tenet of mental fitness is self awareness. It's interesting you bring us here, Michael, because it speaks to one of those first things as a mental health professional. As you're sitting with an individual, you're trying to understand as they're describing things, the kind of level of insight as they're talking about it, and what you can do to help them increase awareness and insight. And then we understand and try and assess quickly how sort of people are in their active judgment as you make decisions in your life. Are there examples in the last month or two that help me have a sense of like, it's a good judgment, right? It could be as simple as you've had a lot of symptoms and you decided to get help, right? That shows some good judgment versus you know. Uh, you should stop drinking, but you keep getting in your car drunk. Okay, this is obviously bad judgment. That's the mental status exam.
Mm,
I'm sure for all of the mental health professionals out there, maybe I missed a piece or two, but that's off the cuff.
yeah. No, that makes sense. So it's a matter of degree and the effects that the symptoms have on your life outcomes. If your spouse leaves you or you get fired from your job, whatever it is, gambling, sex, depression, anxiety, you have a problem. I mean, I suppose you're a moderate drinker and it doesn't affect anything, and you have a happy life and you have 2 drinks a night. You don't have a drinking problem, even though it's.
Oh, I still think of it. No, I've shifted on that, Michael. Now all the new data. I guess now you have a cancer
I know you're
problem.
not supposed to
Then
have
you have a
any
drinking problem,
drinks.
right?
I know. I don't want to hear this.
No
I like
drinks.
a
No, you
beer
gotta come
after a
on, come
workout.
on over. I love alcohol. I've drank most of my life until maybe like 4 years, 3 or 4 years ago when I stopped drinking,
You
and
did
so
completely, 100%.
yeah,
Wow. And
100%.
do you
I
notice a
haven't.
difference?
I do notice some big
Uh,
differences, and as I share in the book, it's not a big part of the book. You don't have to stop drinking, but it's one of those things for me that helped kind of with a number of things from my sleep to my mood. I think the cognitive kind of shift and creative shift was helpful for me. And then I noticed different things. I've been like everybody. I'd done like a dry January,
Right.
and I felt great, and then like, oh, like
Sober
struggled
October.
through. Then like totally fine for those last weeks, and then would return to drinking.
Yeah.
And I noticed after 3, 4 months, and then again at about a year, something shifted. And then the surprising part, which I found really lovely, is he's not like thinking about it anymore. It was weird. It's taught me a lot as a psychiatrist, and you see this with patients all the time. But when it happens to you, or it's just something that used to be on your mind a lot, and now it's just not.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. Okay, maybe alcohol wasn't a good example. I get sad or depressed periodically. Just things happen,
Okay.
and
Thanks for sharing that.
but I just I go out for a workout, go for a bike ride, or I do a little work on my next book or whatever, and I'm kind of pumped up, and it goes away. So I don't have a problem with depression. But at what point would you say to your client, at least they came to you, so right there, that's some self awareness that there's a problem. But then how would you say, okay, at this point, I think we need to assign an SSRI, or we need to change your diet or whatever, because obviously this is a problem.
Yeah, well, for almost everybody, I'm interested in hearing about their diet and maybe shifting it. And I think for someone like yourself, where you're mentioning you're getting into some down moods, I'd be careful not to pathologize that.
Mm.
Some people are a little more somber. There are parts that, everyone's dealing with a whole lot right now. No matter where you are on the political spectrum, no matter where you are in the world, it's just that there's a lot of change, there's a lot of transitions. And so I think, processing and understanding what our feelings are is super, important. When do I start thinking there's a quote unquote problem and somebody might meet criteria for depression? I'm much more stringent than, again, those DSM criteria, in the sense that if you're really, really tearful, because the SSRI antidepressants are particularly good for tearfulness. If you're having horrible insomnia because you're so anxious all the time, and kind of I don't know, kind of a slightly mildly agitated feeling to you. That might be another, and you're from a family where multiple people have taken SSRI medications and it's kind of helped. When we look at how the medications work, and they get criticized so much, they're really great tools, a lot of them. They help in some ways tune down some of the signals from the brain. It's kind of why people often medications work best at the beginning, whereas psychotherapy, talk therapy, tends to kind of get better as it gets longer, right? Because there's more nuance, more detail, more experience and trust together.
So you opened one of your chapters with a female patient that came to you to ask about that meta-analysis on SSRIs that she had read. Well, everybody saw that study published, and it's like, oh, so they don't really work. Okay, so give us the
Uh,
lowdown on SSRIs. Where
Here's the lowdown, people. Lowdown from me, lowdown from if you pull all the data together, lowdown if you ask AI well, is that
Grok? What's the latest on SSRIs?
ask it. I mean, as I prepared for this media tour, I wanted to get this right. And, first of all, my bias is everybody. I'm a psychiatrist. I don't take any money from big pharma and never have. I've never given a drug lunch, period.
That's funny.
I'm funded by patients who come to see me. And so, and meaning that, medication should be something that when people are struggling with mental health disorders, let's take one that's a little more serious, like bipolar disorder. So many people just never get treated. And so a lot of times when we kind of get in these, kind of conversation about SSRIs, we kind of think globally about them, and we miss some basic stats. Like 1 in 4 women over the age of 60 in America takes an SSRI medication.
Wow,
Like we asked about
25%.
my matriarchs earlier. It's like, so I tend to listen to women over 60. I find them pretty wise. I find you don't push them into or force, there's a way that when they're taking those medicines, I'm kind of curious. I don't think it's because their doctors necessarily are, pushing them to. And if they didn't work, I don't think they'd take them. I think people kind of vote with their feet. I think, let's say, about 60% of people who have symptoms of depression primarily, and some with anxiety, there's a little less efficacy in anxiety. You have a good effect. Um, we find it's hard to get people into full remission. And in some ways, that's where this book comes in, because what I find is that, if you come to me, you're drinking 2 nights a week, you don't have exercise or movement as part of your life, you have a low quality, kind of ultra processed food diet, you haven't spent time kind of working on building connections, you don't have much of a, just kind of support structure, you don't spend much time outside. Most of your entertainment is entertainment. It's kind of passive. You don't have a hobby, which, by the way, decreases your risk of depression by a third. right? So in that scenario when we're like, oh, Prozac doesn't work, and it's like, it feels to me there's a lot more going on there where a tool, a medication like an SSRI that can help with symptoms for some people, to me, it just feels like it would be great if there's a lot less stigma, that the kind of treatment decisions are left to treatment experts, and that patients get to kind of have access to these if they want them. And if they work, they could like take them. It's why actually this new generation is very
Mm.
cool. They're like much more relaxed about, if something works for the mental health. I don't know. It's just, it's a better vibe, it seems. But that's my lowdown. I prescribe medications responsibly when they can. I don't think anybody should be delusional that they're perfect, but I do think they're a lot safer than people kind of perceive them
Mm.
as. And then I always remind people, boy, there's all this talking about it. And at the end of the day, if you have depression or anxiety, you've tried lifestyle stuff, it hasn't worked. Trials of things are really smart. And that can be medicines. There are a couple of supplements that have some good data. That could be another, a therapist. That could be a retreat, right? But a trial of a medication, I think, is something a lot of people don't consider, and they should.
Yeah, so perhaps an analogy would be that SSRIs are not like taking a statin, where my cholesterol is going to go down. It pretty much doesn't matter what I'm doing. But it would be helpful if I worked out and had a plant-based diet, say something like that. But SSRIs are more complex than that. You have a suite of things you could be doing, such that they may work if you, just to go through your list, you have some self-awareness and you have better nutrition, work out every day, you sleep, you have good connection. We'll go through all these in a minute, but social engagement and so forth, purpose in your life. Then maybe the SSRI will have more of an effect if you don't do those things.
Yeah, yeah, and I also think, it's a way that I assess meds is I see people doing more of those things, more engaged in work, feeling better, able to socialize more. And it's, in a period after a medicine was started, you kind of see how these things often work together for patients in the real world. And I think you're exactly right. SSRIs are much more complex than people give them credit for. For example, you have two medicines, the same class, Zoloft and
Mm.
Prozac. People have very different responses to these. And when you're in my chair and you see people on multiple different medications, oftentimes because they don't have full efficacy, you get a sense of how complex the brain is. And yeah, how it's, for some patients really a challenge to find the
And is
right
it
mix.
because people have different physiologies or because of these different things in your list of 9? So, their nutrition, their movement, sleep, social connection, engagement, having a purpose,
Yeah.
having a job, and so on. Those family, love, um, uh, people vary in that, not just neurophysiology, say.
Yep, I think we're talking about maybe 2 levels. One is the genetics,
Mm.
which is like, "Hey, you got dealt a bad hand." I was going over some genetic testing with a patient who was like, we're kinda, just they have a version of the COMT gene. It's what recycles
Mm.
dopamine in the brain that is just very, very extra effective. And so and they've been wondering, why does this medicine work so well? And it's like, it kind of maybe lines up. Usually I don't love explanations like that, but for this patient, it kind of makes, well, the genetic testing isn't that good or helpful in that way, but sometimes it helps as we kind of see an effect and try and make sense of it. But anyway, there's the genetic effect, right? How are the genes that you got dealt? Some of us just have more risk for bipolar disorder, depression, alcohol use disorder, just very clear in the genes. You can see it in families. And then there's the epigenetics, which is how our lifestyle choices and factors in our lives turn on and off genes. And so that's in a lot of ways what the tenants are about, are trying to take the science of, hey, if we wanted to live a lifestyle by which we were more in a brain growth, brain repair mode, like what would you do?
Mm.
Like, and how would you kind of design that with the latest science, thinking about things like neuroplasticity and inflammation? And then, things start to line up as you see some of the data, like some of the tenants are mentioning when you see, oh, strange, like we all agree inflammation's bad. Well, when you're more isolated, your inflammatory factors go up.
Mm.
Like,
You mean socially
when
isolated?
you, yeah.
Mm.
And so this idea that the social isolation really has this, kind of epigenetic and biological effect on us.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay, a couple more questions before we get to go through the 9. You mentioned bipolar. What is that, and what can be done about it?
Okay. Bipolar disorder is a condition. It's a mood disorder. It's a condition of mood cycling, and so really there are kind of two classic mood disorders where we have unipolar or people who are struggling primarily and only with depression. They'd feel down. People who have mood cycling disorders like bipolar disorder also will cycle up. And they'll begin to feel hypomanic. Hypomanic is a feeling of expansiveness, grandiosity, irritability, and often almost always a decreased need for sleep. And that can expand and expand and expand for people and move from hypomania into mania, where people are then, mania requires hospitalization or people end up in jail as one of the diagnostic criteria or arrested just because they lose control of their behavior, their thoughts speed up, um, their voice gets louder. And so that's a bipolar 1 condition. There's also bipolar 2, which is just struggling between depression and hypomania. And so these disorders usually the treatments start with mood stabilizers, where you're trying to both prevent mania and depression. Um, and often the depressive phase is what people struggle with the most.
Wh-
And then it's one of these disorders that's there are some new and interesting ideas about them as we think about things like inflammation in the microbiome, in terms of okay, if it is a cycling disorder and, inflammation is one of the things that tends to trigger both depression, but often for some patients also mania. Like, again, what can we understand more of how we can have a really holistic approach to helping these patients manage the disorder? What can be done? Better treatment. I mean, I think mood stabilizers are really helpful.
Like, what would you prescribe for bipolar?
It depends on the patient, but the gold standard of treatment for bipolar 1 disorder would still be lithium. And again, I think it's a great example of one of these things that has so much stigma around it, right? Like, Michael, everyone likes magnesium, right? Right? Like everyone loves magnesium. It's like the most popular mineral. Everybody wants to take it, all the different forms of it. Lithium's right next to magnesium on the periodic table. But if you say to people like, "Oh, got like a little lithium," or like, "I've got like the original 7 Up, which was lithiated." I mean, it had lithium in
Really?
it.
Oh my god.
Or yeah, or if you look at groundwater, there's this great research. If you look at the lithium in the groundwater, places that have more lithium have less homicide, less suicide,
What?
less violent
Oh,
crime.
come on.
So there's
That's one of I don't know.
no, yeah, look at
It's a
that. I'm
correlational
happy to share
study,
the
yeah.
not my research. I just think it's one of these things that there's even some data that lithium has an anti-dementia effect. So
Ooh,
there's one of my psychopharm supervisors like
interesting.
really very lithium positive. So lithium, lamictal or lamotrigine is another great mood
Mm,
stabilizer that I use a fair amount of. So I think for bipolar disorder, it's also important to note, along with the psychopharmacological part, the meds that are very helpful and again quite evidence based. There's also some interesting research out of Stanford. Shabani Sethi, who runs the metabolic psychiatry division there, completed a pilot trial with 23 patients, 19 of whom had bipolar disorder, using a ketogenic style diet.
oh, wow.
These are very low carbohydrate diets and having some good effects in terms of patients having better mental health outcomes, but also just doing better in their overall metabolic and physiological health, losing a lot of weight, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay, last question before we get to your 9. And we've been following this debate on the spike in teen, young adult depression and anxiety, suicidal ideation, cutting, self-harm, this kind of thing. And, there's several people writing books about this. Is it due to screen time, social media, coddling of parents, not enough outdoor, unstructured playtime in childhood, generational differences, and so on? What are your thoughts on what's going on?
Let's just go through the numbers. So when I finished my residency, 2004, newly minted psychiatrist, 8.1% of our adolescents and teens had clinical depression. A decade later, it was up to 14%.
Whoa.
Today, it's
Whoa.
20%. So 1 in 5.
That's
Uh, so something's going on. Obviously, the screens and social media have something to do with it. I think there are certainly some breakdowns in how people are forming social ties, hobbies, connections have certainly shifted. There's a complexity in how our teens are interacting with one another, between whether it's the texting or the Snapchatting or the messaging or the TikToking. It's just it's a very complex landscape. Um, think the what to do about it is to attend to it. Well, the first tenet being self awareness is to ask us all to be very reality based. That there are things to do. You ran through a list of things. Some of which are just true. Our teens don't spend as much time outside. Teens have never spent as much time on a screen. The screen's everywhere. My kids are in school. Everything's on an iPad now. And I find that very disorienting as a parent is like, I really like learning. I love school. I love science. I was sitting with my daughter. We took this great daddy daughter trip where I just had this like very painful realization. I just wasn't as kind of engaged and aware of what was going on academically, in part because it's just all buried in the screen. It felt to me like if there was like a textbook, I've been very, kind of like flip through it like we did back in the day. So, Michael, I don't want my soundbite to be that we're missing textbooks. That's what teachers do today. But I think what I'm maybe suggesting is, as we say, it's multimodal.
Yeah.
That there isn't one answer to this. It isn't just social media. I use social media all the time. I don't know. I think it helps my mental health. I feel much more connected. I feel like I'm being more effective. I try and curate my feed from the things that make me feel too badly.
All
I
things
think
in
there are some
moderation.
answers around nutrition, and I think there are certainly some answers around helping get through, I would say, some of the misinformation around human development that people are propagating. We should stop telling teens to follow their passion. I think we should probably back off sports development a little bit. It's not a very satisfying career path for most people. I think there's a way that helping people get onto probably a good example. I was really helped by a bunch of institutions. I got an amazing education, and I- I don't know. I would say I'm that much smarter than the average bear just through hard work and good opportunities. I've been able to have a really nice professional life. You talk to kids about or teens about like medical school, most people are like, "Oh, being a doctor is horrible. It's awful. Like, don't go into medicine."
Really?
So I think there's just a lot of pressure right now, and it's very important. I think for adults to step up, remember to keep growing up, and to be inspiring to the generation below us. It's maybe something that we don't talk enough about. But if we're going to be skeptical, I would say one of the side effects that's happened is people have been, I don't know, maybe paying less attention to being like a model and a role model.
Mm.
Is that we have teens that are drifting more, that aren't really sure who to look to for mentors, who they can trust. Um, whether it's all of the gummies everyone's taking, or the alcohol, or not to be a downer. It's just I find a lot of teens maybe struggle to find that adult in their life who's steady,
Mm.
who's trustworthy, who's really going to listen, who's not going to get distracted by their phone.
That's one of my explanations for the Jordan Peterson effect. That is, a lot of these people that follow him, they don't have a father figure or a role model or something, and he kind of stands in for that.
Michael, you make a good psychiatrist, and you're a little therapist. I like
I don't
the
know
I
what I'm
like the
talking
daddy
about. I'm just
interpretation.
making up just so
Daddy
stories. I don't really know.
that Jordan Peterson phenomena is spot on, right? That he speaks in an oratorical manner. He quotes the Bible. He's like the daddy you never had,
Mhm.
and he's stern, right? He wants you to live according to values,
Clean
and
your
what's he want?
room.
And he wants you to write well. I mean, like, who else gets on the internet and it's like, young man, like, put your thoughts down. So, I know there's lots of controversy there, but I also think some of the appeal is it's directive and it's aspirational for men. They're very different, but it's where Scott Galloway is a
Right.
similar effect, right? He's saying, hey, you've got to do these things to
Yeah.
launch. It's not that hard, but it takes work, and here's what they are. And I think a lot of people feel they're needing that. Sometimes I wonder, it's like, I don't know, it kind of feels a little hysterical to me, to like a complete breakdown of society where it's like, I don't know, guys, like some of the rules are still the same.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of Lenore Skenesi's free range kids movement. I was born in 54. That's all there was in the 60s when I was growing up. It's
Right,
just free
right.
range play. Just go out and come back when it's dark. Okay. And then I raised my daughter in the 90s, And this was the kind of the start of play dates, like you'd arrange with parents to get together, but I would just drop her off and then I go off and do my thing or whatever. And it wasn't terribly structured. And now I have an 8-year-old son, and there is nobody that I have met that has unstructured playtime. Every one of his friends call the parents, like, oh, well, we have an opening like a week from Tuesday between 2 and 4 o'clock. Oh, okay. I mean, it's just so strong. He's got this and this lesson, and then he's got this sport and this class and this, and boom, boom, boom. It's like, wow, that's very different.
Yep. It doesn't leave a lot of time to unwind. It doesn't leave much time to what we call in therapy to process, to sit with some of your feelings. You give a good example. You say, I get a little blue and I go get on my bike. And I'm sure on that bike you're thinking about it, you're sweating, you're starting to feel a little better. You're seeing your own kind of potency of like, hey, I can do things to shift my mood. I can do things to take control of this situation to understand what's going on. So, we don't have a little, if that's not scheduled in,
Hmm.
and something hits you, it's not a lot of free time that people have to explore. And I also find, in one of the tenants engagement, I write about in some ways because I struggle with of getting beyond that, just turning on a show, right? Or just kind of being passive in our time, being really engaged with our, let's say our hobbies, right? Where there's a little bit more movement, a little bit more often than I find a lot more payback for
Mm,
people.
yeah. So, and then the last point on this, because I had Gene Twangy on the show, and this is now become one of my favorite books, called Generations, but the generational differences that have shifted. This is called life history theory, based on how long people live. The longer you live, this is the life history theory, the slower life can develop and the less kids you need. So if life is much safer, more secure, and you don't have to have kids so soon or so frequently. You can develop your career slower. You can get married later, and so on. She has data showing this across like the last century, and how, like, for my generation, women in my generation, baby boomers, their first pregnancy was age 19. Today, it's 10 years later. The average is 29. And just across the board, how many, when did you get your driver's license? When's the first time you had sex? When you get married, and so on. It's all like much later or not at all. And so her theory is that it has to do with this almost an evolutionary explanation that if you live a short high risk life, you've got to get through things much faster. And therefore, if you have 6 or 7 kids, who has time to, coddle all 7 of them, right? But if you have one, I got one. That's all. I'm putting all my eggs in this basket. I'm going to be super risk free. I'm going to stand there next to the playground and make sure nothing happens bad on the slide or the monkey bars, right? And I'm going to make sure I know exactly where my kid is every waking moment, because that's all I got.
Yeah, there's a preciousness to the resource.
Right.
I also think the point you make about the sort of health span growing
Mm.
right now, the idea that you and I, as men in our 50s, right, still can be thinking about work in a growing way, right? It's not just like a couple more years to retirement. I think also the parenting. I'm finding parenting in my 50s really quite fun. It's like
Totally.
there's a little bit of a different feel how I'm in the world this year than I was in past years. So,
But Drew,
it,
you're being too generous. I just turned 70. Oh, to be in my
okay,
50s again. but
okay,
but to your
okay.
point, I mean, the idea of retiring, what would I do? I like what I do. I don't want to retire.
Well, I love it. I love that you're in your 70s, right? And you're,
And most of the people
you're
my
not,
age, even those that are retired, they haven't slowed down at all. I mean, you got to keep going.
so that's also a new phenomena, right? That you're talking about. Also, we say it's bad. I mean, and not bad, but that notice like we're quote unquote overscheduled. And you always hear that kind of soundbite I gave, right? Of like, oh, we should get a little boredom time. And,
Yeah.
I also wonder what it adds up to. There's a way that all of like the lessons and the attention and the investment I think families being clear about what they're getting from it. I think that I'm in this really wonderful active community here in Jackson where everybody's doing all these different sports. But if you just do one sporting activity a day, you're not really a local. Folks here like climb a mountain in the morning. Like by the afternoon, they're like swimming across a lake. I mean, it's like incredibly healthy
Fly
community. It's a
fishing.
little Oh yeah, fly fishing, mountain biking. I mean, it's incredible. Really focused on mental health too. It's been really inspiring. Really trying to
So
understand
let's
more.
kind of break down what's going on by doing all those things, right? So your brain is socially engaged, physically engaged. Let's just start with those. You have physical movement pumps more blood through the brain, and then what does that do? Clear out inflammation, or what?
Couple things. So like let's talk about so in healing the modern brain, I call this the tenet of movement. I try and move away from exercise because I think there's a lot of you're a good example. You're a guy in your 70s. I think it's great for you to lift some weights, but do I need you to go into the gym to stay physically healthy? Like, heck no. I'd much rather have you with like a group of guys hiking in the woods, because there we're getting a number of tenants. You're getting some socializing, you're getting some nature time, and walking is great, especially if it's on a rough path for you, for your balance, for your stability, and for your core, which is somebody in your 70s, you want to be more focused on that. You get these things called myokines, which got a little video that goes into some detail, but along with those endocannabinoids and endorphins, all those things, myokines are molecules that our muscles make that kind of spur more brain growth and more nerve growth factors. And then along with what you said, more blood flow. And then I like the just the self-actualization
Mm,
effect. Like, I get done with that run or, you get that pump in the gym and it's like, you feel great, because you chose to do it and then you did it. So I think those things are all helping our mental fitness and again, helping us feel great. I tell a story in the book of a woman I worked with who, like all docs, I was kind of on her to exercise and thought of telling her how it'd be great for her depression and telling her, studies show it's equal to Zoloft at 18 months on.
mm,
And it's really, didn't take,
mm.
wasn't of interest. And then she came in like beaming one day and told me about how she started tango dancing again. And that, there's a class and there's a group on Thursday nights. And she used to do it when she was younger. And she was burning more calories doing that than I was exercising for sure. And she was also having a lot more fun. But, that doesn't count as like exercise. And it just taught me a lot of like, it should, because it's certainly just as good for her.
Right.
So some of those other activities I talked about were getting out into nature, and I call this the tenet of grounding in the book, with this idea that when we get out into green spaces, the physiology of our brain tends to shift. We tend to relax a lot. There's interesting things in the forest for your brain and for your immune system. There are these molecules called phytocides that trees secrete. And when we kind of breathe them in, it shifts our immune system in ways that researchers think are quite beneficial and healthy. There's actually a meta analysis I talk about in the book, a collection of studies looking at forest bathing to treat depression. And these studies take people into the forest and find a good antidepressant effect of being in big nature. So again, one of these things that maybe it's a park. I lived in New York City and Manhattan for most of my career. The North Woods of Central Park just saved my mental health.
Really?
I mean, I'm a farm boy. It was great living in the city, but a challenge in some ways. Man, in my roughest times, I'd just get out there and I'd be in the woods, and it just would settle me down, and I'd go pace around and kind of like you do on your bike, kind of find my good mood again. And um, so
Yeah,
I think
interestingly,
another one.
I've been riding gravel bikes on dirt paths that are rugged with rocks and branches, and I find it much more interesting and challenging than just the boring paved bike path on my road bike. So, what is it? Is it the uneven surface makes you pay more attention and attunes your senses and your fine motor control, that kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first, Michael, you're just, you're the trendiest grandpa out there. And maybe not a grandpa
No,
yet,
I'm
but
not. Not yet.
not yet. But 70 of you're gravel biking, which is for everybody listening. That's in between kind of road biking and mountain biking. You get a slightly heavier frame, slightly thicker wheel. I think you're talking, really about this tenet of engagement, that when our minds, our hunter gatherer brain was really wired to be taking in a lot of information all the time, we're designed to be thinking about food, thinking about safety and shelter, really picking up a lot about the environment around us. In the book, I write about this, how, if you kind of go back to evolutionarily what your brain was doing when you walked through the woods, you're taking in all this information, what plants are safe, what aren't. You've got to remember all of that and pass it on to people. You've got to find dinner tonight. I mean, it's an incredible amount of stimulation. It's kind of what you're replicating is you're on the bike and it's not just safe and you're zoned out to your podcast and you're having to avoid more. It engages you. I think it's why people love the trail running is it really almost like distracts them, engages them, keeps them going, and really pulls us in. So I think that's part of what's happening. Why that's a little bit more fun for you, and then I think it's just more challenging in the sense that with the road bike you're kind of just grinding, and a lot of people are looking for a little bit more intensity and don't have that kind of time in their
Yeah.
workouts.
Yeah, Lance was just posting on Twitter last month how much he prefers riding gravel and mountain bike to all those Tour de France's he did and all that stuff because it's way more interesting and challenging for his body. He's like a big fitness guy now, just overall, and that seems to be the trend. I've heard that also with runners. Go out on those single track trails, how much better it is. So, okay, so and then tie that into inflammation because that was an important part of your book. How does the brain get inflammation in it or anywhere else in the body? From what? And then how does exercise help that?
So inflammation, everyone, is our body is just natural alarm systems. Whether it's classic ones like a virus or bacterial infection, that mounting that response to protect you is what your inflammatory system, your immune system does. So absolutely critical part of you. Just like any alarm system, you want it to go off at the right time. And so just like I remember before I took the medical school entrance exam, the MCAT, there was a car alarm outside of the second story apartment. I still remember this night. I studied for months for this test, and this car alarm wouldn't shut up. It's on all night. So I just did not get any good quality. This is horrible. So you don't want that to happen to your inflammatory system. I ended up doing okay, but uh, um, so inflammation, though, for a lot of people is getting dysregulated. We have things like a big rise in autoimmune disorders. And then, in part, because we have had a lot of obesity and weight gain and a lot of increase in illnesses like diabetes, both of which really contribute to inflammation. So, a lot of what we call adipose tissue, fat tissue around the organs, what's called visceral adiposity. It's not just storage of calories, it's quite metabolically active tissue. And so you end up kind of with more of an inflammatory or heightened inflammatory state. Um, so these are some of the things driving inflammation. A lot of people are eating a more inflammatory diet, right? Where you're just not getting a lot of the nutrients you need to fight inflammation. You're not getting a lot of things like well, inflammation and then another lens in the book, the microbiome, are very related. When you eat a diet without fiber and without fermented foods, you're going to have a less diverse what's called microbiome. These are all the different types of organisms that live in your gut. And we know, and this sounds like wild science, but we know that the organisms that live in your gut have a lot to do with how your immune system regulates itself. And so this is where, I'm sure everybody listening has heard about this, right? That all this kind of excitement about gut health and how gut health affects immune function and how that then affects brain health. And so how does this all get to the brain? Well, your brain has its own specialized immune system because if you think about it, it can't respond like anything else, right? Like if I go get a cut, it's going to get swollen, it's going to get red, it's going to get some pus in it. Your brain doesn't it can't swell that much. It can have a lot of pus in it, and so it has a very specialized immune system and a specialized set of cells. What some researchers observe is that when our body has a lot of excess inflammation, the kind of antenna, as it were, of the immune system of the brain picks up on that and itself gets kind of activated. And so, the idea behind this isn't to like fear monger, right? That your inflammatory system's all haywire and your brain's getting, dysregulated, but to just again note the new science. Like there's a lot of new science around inflammation in the brain. We know that about a third of patients who don't get better from depression have high inflammatory levels. We know that when people take antidepressants and they're also taking an anti-inflammatory, they work about twice as well in some studies. So, there's something really going on. We know some of the antidepressants like Prozac are anti-inflammatories as well as
Mm.
SSRIs. And so again, if you have a lot of inflammation, itchy eyes, lots of itchiness, rashes, if there's like obvious signs of inflammation, that certainly maybe relates. And understanding more of what's going on, helping quell that is certainly going to be a path to feeling better. For other folks, I think it's about kind of working this up and just, in your annual labs, making sure you get what's called a CRP, a C-reactive protein, get a sense of your inflammatory levels. Some people find it, and surprisingly, it's high. Um,
Oh, I can just go
uh,
to my GP and ask for that test?
yeah, yeah. You just or these days, I think most GPs in your annual exam just tell them you're worried about if you're worried about inflammation or you have some symptoms of inflammation, or you've got dysregulated gut health, or you think you have any autoimmune stuff. Yeah, you certainly talk to your primary care doctor about that.
Okay. Nutrition, that's another one of the big ones, and then, along the lines, explain what nutritional psychiatry is.
All right. Well, nutritional psychiatry is what happens when you turn a Indiana farm boy into a Manhattan psychiatrist, I think is probably the short answer. Nutritional psychiatry is a new field. So I finished my residency like 2004. And I was really into food. Back then, I was a vegetarian. We grew a lot of our food growing up, and
Farm to
it was just
table.
yeah, farm to table. I watched and I kind of watched that movement explode in New York, and New York really made me a foodie. I mean, I loved learning so
Nothing
much
better.
about food, and um, but nutritional psychiatry didn't exist back then. I think the first time it gets used, I think my cookbook Eat Complete is the first time it gets used in a book. In nutritional psychiatry, I define it's the use of nutrition, and for me, that's food. A lot of people get into the supplements. I'm just interested in what you eat. It's the use of food to optimize brain function, and so this is all of us, right? And then to treat and prevent mental health disorders do the foods you eat, can we think of a set of foods that are going to make your brain bigger, better connected, more robust as you're aging? And then if you do have mental health problems, are there certain things, like if you have a family with a lot of depression, are there certain foods that we can emphasize? And does the data tell us that might prevent or decrease your risk of depression? And then and certainly if you're in treatment, as everybody listening can appreciate, as we are talking about kind of earlier, you come sit down and, along with maybe some therapy and some support, maybe meds, maybe not. But along with that, if you shift from, not really eating that much, just eating on the fly, eating fast food, to being more intentional about it. Like I had a patient this morning tell me, I had eggs, avocado. I'm really working on protein. I know when I have too much or even just a little bit of sugar in the morning, it's just knocking me out. I get so tired. They're really kind of seeing how in a very like hour to hour way, what they're eating can affect how alert they are, how sharp they are, and how their overall dietary pattern really relates to their mental health, which, I adore that. So that's nutritional psychiatry. And then this book, I just get one chapter on nutrition. And so I'll tell everybody the place I tell everyone to start. I have my little rhyme: seafood, greens, nuts and beans, and a little dark chocolate. And that if you're looking for just, hey, these are great food categories that you can help heal your modern brain, that's where I recommend people go. In the seafood, I love anchovies, sardines, wild salmon, but I also really encourage people to look at the bivalves. But going for smaller fish helps us avoid the microplastics, avoid the mercury and stuff that people are concerned about these days. Leafy greens. I'm a big kale guy. I wrote an erotic book about kale, 50 Shades of Kale. I called it Kale Erotica. I thought it'd be like a new genre, but it didn't really
They didn't
take
take
off,
off.
Michael. But
You need a
um,
Netflix special on kale erotica, but not Pornhub.
maybe some. So, but really any greens, microgreens are ones that I'm really finding very efficient to use in my own kind of kitchen that just, drop a handful on everything, my taco, my pasta, my pizza, all of my bad Western food. I just drop microgreens on. I call it brain food.
That
And
being kale and what else? Micro.
so some of the microgreen mixes, there are all kinds of, I see all kinds of wild stuff: kale, arugula, spinach,
So I can get
Um,
that in the produce section of my supermarket.
yeah, you'll see everybody the microgreens I'm talking about are in these little flat
Oh, yeah.
packs, and I find them interesting again because you just sprinkle them on. For the other ones, I think it's really one for those of you who are, maybe cooking for 1 or 2, remember frozen veggies and frozen greens are great. Um,
But not
but
as good
yeah,
as fresh.
you know, I think for some people they're as good or better. I mean, I think broccoli is a good example for me. During the pandemic, I started just we got more frozen broccoli, and I
Huh.
realized, boy, I ate more of it. It never went to waste. And they say they flash freeze the stuff so close to the field
Huh.
that the frozen actually retains and kind of has some of the highest
Oh,
nutrient
wow, I didn't know
values.
that. Okay.
So
All right. That's good to know. Uh,
so that's nutritional psychiatry. Feed your mental health is my little
oh, I
tagline,
like it. No, I like it a
and
lot.
again,
So
it's not to fearmonger, it's not to, like it's just to I think people are tired of the, like, listen to the carnivores and the vegans argue online some more. I mean, it's just like, it's been 20 years of
yeah.
that. It's just so it's like, "Oh my god, we're gonna have some other keto
Yeah.
revolution?" It's just like, let's focus on what most people are struggling with. Not enough plants, no omega-3 fats or seafood in their diet, and not cooking at home, not eating together, not eating enough olive oil. I mean, it's there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that I think a lot of folks can do to clean up
Oh, right. Okay.
their
So on
nutrition.
oils, then avocado-based oil is good. What other oil should I?
I think good but expensive. I'm an olive oil fan. I think it's just, the data on the Mediterranean diets tends to stay pretty
Yeah.
true. I think that right now it kind of illustrates where there's a big challenge in how people are interpreting science. You have the let's make everything beef tallow and saturated fat
Mm.
crowd. You have the hey, let's actually look at the data. And even though nobody likes canola oil, it actually, when you give people more canola oil, their health metrics tend to
Mm.
improve. Um, and then everybody loves olive oil. So
Mm.
I tend to focus on getting people to eat more olive oil and
Virgin
that really to be
olive
their
oil.
yeah, virgin or extra virgin
Yeah.
olive
Yeah.
oil. It's kind of one of those places I splurge in my own diet. There's this like olive oil club, fresh pressed olive oil club that someone on my team got me into, and it is like my best favoriteest treat. I like the olive oil also because I pour it on a lot of different things. I can put it on my oatmeal.
You put on your
I,
oatmeal. That's
I
a good idea.
yeah, I do like a savory oatmeal, like some oats, or a better one would be like some barley grits with a little oatmeal, and just do a little something a little more savory in the morning to just, um, not get things started so sweet if you're in the
And
mood for
no
that.
brown sugar on there like Starbucks gives you for their oatmeal.
I have a little brown
You
sugar
do?
on my this morning. I had a little oatmeal, had a bunch of fresh fruit, a little brown sugar.
Okay.
I try to put a big handful of nuts or a scoop of peanut butter in there because I'm always wanting to like more fats, more protein is kind of where I find people struggling. Like once you get them off the processed foods, it's really like high quality, satiating
Oh,
calories. And
I
so
know I was
there's
gonna
going to
ask
be
you. So we have a Whole Foods and a Bristol Farms here. So they have these not just peanut butter, but they got the almond butter, the cashew butter, the mixed nut butter, and all those things. Are any of them better than others, or are they all just good nuts?
you're going to get different nutrients. Like vitamin E is very special in almonds.
Mm.
And so you'll get more of that in the almond butter. Cashews have a little bit more iron. It's so I grew up in Crawford County, Indiana. It's the poorest county in Indiana. And I think the problem I see with some of these butters is just the
Oh,
cost.
right. There.
And
Oh, they're
so when you look at,
ridiculously expensive.
yeah, buying a pound of almonds versus almond milk, there's just no comparison.
Right.
You want to buy a pound of
Right.
almonds because you're getting all of the nutrition, you're getting all of the fiber and the vitamin E and all of that stuff. I think one important thing you're talking about is as we get into nut butters, this is a slightly processed food, and you can turn over that ingredient list and it can say peanuts and salt,
Oh.
which is what it should say,
Oh.
or it can say peanuts, palm oil, sugar, salts, a bunch of other stuff. So it's where you just want to be mindful, and I think also be mindful of your budget.
Oh, see, I didn't look at the ingredients. It was just in the super healthy section, so I figured it's gotta be good.
Oh, yeah, I always mess this up. I never look at the ingredients, and I come back, my wife's like, "Why are you feeding us palm oil again?"
That's really funny, yeah. Okay, back to the fish thing. Should I still be worried about mercury in fish, or didn't they clean up that problem?
I think you should be aware of mercury in fish. If mercury accumulates in larger fish, there's going to be like shark, swordfish. I would say that tuna, some types of tuna. I think if you're eating tuna 3 times a day or twice a day and you haven't, like, thought about mercury, that would be a problem. I would say that, most mercury exposure is probably not coming through seafood, and again, the way to avoid mercury and microplastics in seafood is to go for smaller fish. So this is where, again, a lot of people don't have, like, a sardine tinned fish game.
Mm, I
You
like
give them a
sardines.
tin of and I mean, I was like this, I had no idea what to do with anchovies or sardines, but, the nice thing is it's a small quantity, usually in a little tin. You can make great sauces like, pasta con sardi, which is like a
Ooh,
not doesn't taste fishy at all.
ooh, that sounds
Um,
good.
and, uh, so, uh, getting me kinda
Yeah,
hungry
I
here,
know.
Michael. So, le le but I got scolded at this international conference once. There is a very prominent psychiatrist who, for years, is really one of the few people involved in omega-3 fats and omega-3 fat research. Who worked at the, I think, National Institute of some long. There's like an alcohol abuse. Sorry, I'm rambling on here. He scolded me because he said, the risk of mercury is so low compared to the risk of not eating seafood,
Mm,
especially for pregnant women. And
yeah.
he kind of made me promise to never say mercury at an international conference because that's all people ever remember. And I'm not sure that's totally accurate, but and I think there are periods like when women are pregnant, or when kids are developing that we want to be mindful of it. But I do generally think that the main risk is in people not consuming seafood.
Yeah, there's been a lot of stories on microplastics. I haven't really looked into it, so that's a real thing. And th- how
Microplastics is a
small
real
are they? I
thing,
mean, you can't
everybody.
see them; they're just so micro.
Can't see them. So there's microplastics, there's nanoplastics. Just the science update on this just came out 2025 Nature article, one of our top science journals. They estimate, and through their research, and kind of aggregating the research, or through the research, found that most people have about a teaspoon of microplastics in their brain. And that microplastics seem to, I think
Unbelievable.
that they found, concentrated in our immune cells, our liver, and our brain. So we don't know exactly what it's doing up there.
So that it
Yeah.
could even get there, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. Apparently, it's that small.
Yeah. Well, the thing about plastics is a lot of the things in there are fat soluble, and so it can, easily pass the blood-brain barrier. They find them in the cells, and some preliminary studies seem to indicate there's some inflammation. There's concerns that people with dementia have more plastics in their
Mm.
brain, relation. So then it leads to that question of like, okay, what do we do? And our house has been pretty, I wouldn't say anti-plastic, but just we try not to use plastic cutting boards. We don't heat any of our food in plastic containers. We store everything in glass.
What's
Are
your
the
spatula
tops
made out of?
metal?
Okay, I just read about
Uh,
that. The black plastic spatula.
yeah,
I have one. Everyone probably has one.
everybody. I don't. And actually, no, one snuck in. But it's one of those things that because you don't feel an immediate effect, right? You don't feel an immediate, excuse me, effect if you start using plastic cutting boards. It's not like you get microplastics in your brain and you're like, "Oh, wow, I'm feeling kind of foggy today. It must be the
Right.
microplastics." So we really want to limit our exposure. Um, Other easy ways is not just eating, it's also we breathe in a lot of microplastics. And so this is again easy way. Like if you have a bunch of nylon or plastic type blankets, pillows, etc., making your bedroom more filled with natural fibers and putting in a HEPA filter. And I'm not like affiliated with anyone. I'm not trying to sell air filters. I'm just like, this is what I've got in my bedroom. It's one of the tenants, the
You have
tenant
a
of
HEPA filter
sleep,
and it runs
where
all night?
yeah, oh yeah, runs all day and all night for sure because it's 8 hours where I can control the environment. So I want it to be an environment with no artificial lights, with the purest, best air, super nice and moist, all exactly what my lungs need. I want there to be no noises that bother my sleep cycling so my brain can do what it needs to do. We get rid of 7 grams of waste while we sleep via the glymphatic system. That's like our brain's waste removal system. So yeah, I've been tracking my sleep for about 4 years, and I'm not big into the trackers or that many metrics. But just as I've been aging, I've just been paying really close attention to sleep and all the sleep data, just how important it is for our
Oh,
brains.
do you have a monitor? A friend of mine was just telling me about the Whoop. It's just a little wrist size,
There's the Whoop. I use a Aura Ring. I
Oh,
don't
I've
have
heard
any
about the Aura
affiliation with them.
Ring, right? Right.
Yeah, I'm on. I think I'm on my like third
So how
one,
does
and
it keep track of
I
your
like it,
sleep
especially.
cycle? It's based on heart rate?
Yeah, it tracks the sleep cycle. It has a bunch of physiological, things going on. It's got all these little sensors in
Yeah.
here. It's tracing heart rate variability, oxygen saturation, and then I think through a combination of what it's picking up on physiologically and movement is tracking some sleep cycling, which is, it's just very interesting to see. It helps also, I think, people be more realistic. You ask patients. I ask all my patients, "Tell me about your sleep." And they say, I try to get to bed at a reasonable time and get about, 7 or 8 hours. I mean, that's what I'd say. And then you actually track your sleep. And like anybody who's saying that is getting probably about 5.5 hours of sleep
Really?
max. Because between the interruptions, the kind of low efficient, your sleep efficiency is not 100%. And so the amount of time that you're in bed is not the amount of time that you're sleeping. And there's all kinds of little awakenings you have. So I find for some patients, especially patients of mine struggling with insomnia, I love it when they get sleep tracking going on because it just gives us a little bit more of a metric. It helps us see where we're having success more than just the qualitative of somebody sleeping better.
Are these little monitors that there's an app on your phone and you can download the data and then see the
Yeah, I can see my sleep score for the day. And, sometimes people find that depressing. I find that it kind of sets a little baseline for me. I obviously know when I don't have a good night's sleep. I think it's nice to have that positive feedback
yeah.
when it's a good night's
Okay,
sleep.
here's your chance to scold me again. So on the sleep thing, I know you're supposed to have it very dark and no screens, no laptop. Okay, so I go to bed, I don't know, around 10 or 11 or so. Then for some reason, I always wake up at like 3 in the morning. So I just queue up a nice like World War II in color documentary, 7 parts. I like last night. I queued up the Battle of Midway. About halfway through it, I fell asleep and I woke up. It was already the Battle of Berlin and the war was almost over. Okay, I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I still fell asleep and I didn't absorb any of that I was sleeping. So didn't I get a perfectly good night of sleep?
I don't think you may took advantage of your middle evening insomnia. I had the same problem, and almost all people do. That as we go into menopause and into andropause, for a variety of different hormonal reasons and urinary reasons, getting up to pee, people just tend to wake up 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and then not be able to fall back asleep.
Right.
I had this
Andropause. What did you
problem.
call it? Andropause. Do I have that?
Andropause.
Is that what older men get?
All men get
Oh,
that. I mean, it's really one of the tragedies of the men's health movement that women get this wonderful framework.
mm.
And maybe no one's ever said that. Maybe that sounds like a particularly dude thing to say, but you get a framework, right? You're feeling irritable. You're not sleeping well. You're itchy. You're having hot flashes, right? You have a community. You have a freaking musical, right? And to sort of understand this change you're going in your life, like what do men have? Like like hair loss and limpness and urinary retention. I mean, it's like there's not as much of a.
That's funny.
So sorry about that. There's not as much of a framework. So yeah, andropause, testosterone levels naturally drop like 40 to 70%.
Mm.
I think like I don't know the exact, but it's like 45 to 55, and so most of the movement and men's health is sort of focused on like testosterone
Mhm.
replacement, but I think there's also the psychological and maturational shifts that happen in men's late 40s and early 50s that, yeah, it's a great period for men to talk more about.
Mhm. Right.
Andropause.
Right. So, but the idea is you still want to get a good 8 hours of sleep in which you are not interrupted. It's dark. It's cooler. There's no screens.
Yeah, for you, I'd rather you like journal with a dim light for 30 minutes and then knock out again.
Mm.
I think that would be a better
Then the
use
Battle of
of your
Midway.
your time. What's that?
Better than the Battle of Midway?
The battle of Midway, well, I think the battle of Midway kinda keeps interrupting you and, but I find a lot of people do need to do something for a little
Mm.
bit, that especially if your brain's in a bad spot or you're struggling with depression, being up in the middle of the night, just kinda, like, sitting there trying to fall asleep is very painful.
Well, to be fair, I mean, if I go camping or I'm traveling, I don't have my laptop or whatever, I just fall back asleep. I just lay there and I don't know how many minutes it takes. So I don't really, I think, really need to, watch a documentary, but I don't know.
Well, it's a good point where it's a choice,
It
right?
is a
And it's a
choice.
little
Yeah.
bit indulgent, maybe. It's like fun to watch for a little while. And, maybe you're a little rebel too. You don't want to like follow the sleep hygiene, get rid of the screen. But it would be, for my patients, I really try to get laptops, TVs, phones, if I can, out of the bedroom.
And when's your
Um,
last meal before you go to bed?
I try to have dinner on the earlier side, so probably by 6:30 or 7 if
Yeah.
possible, and then try and avoid too much snacks, but, I'll be honest, I've got a little ice cream problem, Michael, since you feel I'm
Oh,
rapping your knuckles about so many things. I don't always do a perfect job on that.
yeah.
And then the other big sleep secret I have everybody is my sauna.
Mm.
And I love a sauna. I know it can be a little more pricey. I think it's a great do it yourself project. Like it's part of my Andropause
You have a
kit,
sauna at
the
home?
do it yourself sauna.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
cool.
I put a sauna in every house I've been in
Oh,
recently. I put a sauna in. I just here in Jackson, yeah, I'm in
oh,
there
nice.
every night
Nice.
for about I would say ideally like 30 to 45 minutes for me at about 2 to 10.
Really? Wow. So you're sweating.
Yeah, yeah, I find it really great for sleep,
What are
really
your
a
thoughts on
calming
ice
spot.
plunges?
Not as good as
Mm.
saunas. I think that ice plunging is about discipline for most people,
Yeah.
and then I think the whole kind of cold shock protein thing. I think there's probably some interesting science probably in there. I'm not an expert on that. I I don't find I don't find it particularly as compelling as I do the sauna, but I find a lot of people using them together. One of my favorite psychiatrists who's really up on all the data, he tries to kind of sauna and cold plunge every
Mm.
morning. So
Yeah, there's people here in Santa Barbara that I know that they have a home ice plunge. They're like $6,000. My doctor, I asked
yeah,
my doc about this. He said, if it really lowered the temperature of, I don't know, stick your leg in there and because you have a sore knee or whatever, and it really lowered the temperature all the way down to your bone to like 35 degrees or something, you would have frostbite. You'd have tissue damage. This is not good.
yeah. I mean, my sense is it's about the physiological
Yeah.
response by which you vasoconstrict, you activate a bunch of pathways to try and make a little bit more brown fat,
Yeah.
and you um uh and you activate some of these again in cold shock protein.
Yeah. 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 Oh, so much of this is trendy. You never know. I've been tracking these things my whole life, diet, all that stuff.
Well, I like being a little bit of a skeptic, and
Yeah.
I realize I've got a patient trying to call in, Michael.
Oh, you
So
got to go. Do you have
uh,
to go?
I've got to go in
Oh,
just a
you have a
little
real
bit. But
job. Okay. Well, let's just finish up.
I wanted to make
Just,
sure and answer all your
well,
skeptical
let's
questions
just
about
finish up.
mental
What's the
fitness.
importance of, marriage, social life, friends, purpose, work, all that stuff?
Yeah, so the chapter of connection and the tenet of connection is probably the most important one in a lot of ways for us right now. We've got this huge social isolation epidemic, does horrible things, for your physiology. Your inflammatory factors go up, you're more prone to depression, you're more prone to substance use. And so a lot of people are struggling post pandemic on how to kind of get back in there, whether it's joining some sort of intramural sports or going. I love climbing gyms. I think they're a really great way for people to socialize because it's a little bit social and you'll help each other a little bit, but it's not too social. I'm seeing a lot of sober dance parties. Daybreaker is this great sober dance party traveling around the country, doing all kinds of daybreaker, like right at dawn
Whoa.
parties where people dance and they don't drink. It's great. So there running clubs, trail walking clubs, nature clubs, just putting more structure around your socializing because at the end of the day, I see this all the time with patients. They're isolated. They finish their day at 7. It's like, what are you going to do?
Right.
Walk down to the bar? I mean, it's too heavy of a lift as opposed to, you left work a little early to make it to your 6:30 pottery
Mm.
class. And now you're sitting with four other people, five other people, you got a little lesson and now you're making something. Where it just important to get these things on your schedule and take it a little more seriously. Sometimes like dismiss as like, oh, it's self-care, it's indulgent. It's like, no, it's fundamental for us to find ways to connect more with other people and then to deepen those connections, right? It's not just having like I got a million friends. Part of what we write about in the book is this notion of social connectedness, we're this very socially connected, more connected than ever generation,
Mm.
but at the same time, more and more people are feeling disconnected. And so thinking about the quality of your connections, what kind of things you do to deepen them, spending time on them is a big, big part of the encouragement of healing the modern brain.
Okay, last question. Purpose in life. What does that mean? How do you get it?
Decreased depression lists, like having a strong life purpose. It does everything from it increases beneficial bacteria in your gut. It insulates you against depression. You end up just kind of there are these great studies kind of looking at people who have more purposefulness in their life and more of a sense of meaning, and they just are healthier in all kinds of measures. And so it's one of those things that, can be elusive. I read about my own kind of sense of this as and in some ways struggle with it. Might seem easy, right? I'm a doctor. My purpose should be, obvious. And I don't know. I needed to do some more work on that. I also, with purpose, again, ask people to maybe get away a little bit from this notion of
Mm.
passions, and like that's not really so often related to people's purpose, to be quite honest. I think it's kind of a plague when we ask our younger generation, like, well, follow your passion. It's like that's not really useful or helpful advice.
Yeah, I'm kind
I
of my
think that people
kid's
should.
personal Uber driver these days, and so, but that's kind of purpose. It makes me feel like, hey, I got to get going here.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And it's like it's not, somehow we think about, you're not saving the world. It's like,
Right.
you're taking your kids to school. It's like, yeah, there's also being a present dad. You're getting from point A to point B. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's so in the book, I really encourage people to think about processes that you enjoy. I love a psychotherapy session. Right? It really lights me up. I just
Mhm.
love that creative process of being with another human
Mm.
being in that way. That's really helped inform my sense of purpose and where I'm here, what I'm in service of. And so I just think it's one of those areas that I think a lot of people aren't maybe spending as much time or intention on. And that as some of our natural kind of institutions that help provide that dissipate in people's lives, I just wanted to remind everyone that we're here to live a life with purpose. And through some intentional thoughts, I encourage a lot of journaling in the book, through being really true to yourself and how you're feeling. I think people can get there.
Nice. Drew, thanks a lot. Here it is, Healing the Modern Brain. Dr. Drew Ramsey, thank you for your work and your writings, and go off and see your patient. Don't talk to me anymore. Way more
Michael,
important.
thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. Everybody, thanks for listening. Please, check out the book. I've up on social media,
Cool.
Drew Ramsey, MD, and really appreciate everybody
Cool.
taking
All right.
something for this. My hope, Michael, is like if you're listening, I hope you take something from this and do something about your mental fitness with it. I hope whether it was sardines or going dancing or
Sardines and
going out
dancing.
gravel biking like Michael, I hope it helps you take that next step with your mental fitness. That would
Sounds
just
good.
that would make it all worth it for me.
All right. Thanks, Drew.